Hello, and welcome back to the second day of 360 Open Summit. I'm Graham Brookie. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab.
And I'm Rose Jackson, the director of the DFRLab's Democracy and Tech Initiative. Yesterday, we covered a lot of what happened over the last year or so, as well as the evolving dynamics of disinformation and the study of it over time.
Today, we'll start looking at what all of that means for society and how it shows up geopolitically in the world. We'll hear about the Chinese state's approach to the information environment and technology, as well as social media in conflict and war. Make sure to follow along on Socio or YouTube, and we encourage you to participate, comment, and share on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, always at our handle at DFRLab and at the Atlantic Council, and use hashtag 360OS to stay up to date on all things 360 Open Summit.
Now, to kick us off, we have an exciting panel led by non-resident fellow and the Vice President for Technology Programs at Internews, Kat Duffy. We'll be examining the impact of Platform Inequities International. Kat?
Thanks so much, Rose. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Connected but Unequal, the impact and inequity of global platforms in local environments. I am thrilled and honored to be joined today by two amazing panelists. The first is Mishi Choudhary, a technology lawyer who is based in the United States, an online civil rights activist, as well as the founder of Software Freedom Law Center, India. We are also being joined by Shwe, a long-standing digital rights activist from Myanmar who is joining us today pseudonymously from an undisclosed location. Mishi and Shwe, thank you both so very much for your time. And I would like to start by acknowledging today that the situations that you have both been facing in India and in Myanmar in the past few months have been overwhelming on a personal front and on a professional front. And so I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for gifting us with your time and your expertise this morning. I know your time is incredibly precious. With that, I would like to jump right into this discussion. What I'm hoping that we can do in our conversation today is really illuminate for those who are joining us online what it's like on the ground behind all of the discussions that we see at the global level around policies, around regulatory reform, around oversight boards and different global standards and norms. Because behind all of that, what we have are human rights activists and people who are in danger, who are striving to protect human rights in their environments, striving to promote civil liberties online, and who are in many instances required to be working with platforms and or doing their work on social media platforms and other particularly American technological products in order to achieve their mission. And I really hope that today we can give folks some insight into what it feels like, what the experience of doing that is, and how it is to be a civil rights activist in that situation, trying to improve situations in your country while also navigating the complexities of all these different American companies specifically operating in your own environment. And so with that, Mishi, I'd like to start with you, if I may. India represents a very high priority market for technology companies generally, and particularly American platforms. So they have been expanding in India at a time when we have also seen democratic norms continuing to decline. What role have you seen the platforms playing in supporting democratic norms in India versus undermining them? And as a prominent free expression and digital rights activist, how are you prioritizing your own engagement with platforms? What is that experience like for you?
Thank you, Kat, for having me here and also talking to Shwe. India does always win on numbers. And I will say a few things. India has had China envy for some time in terms of the economic progress which the digital revolution has brought to China. There is a very strong feeling that the talent India has in technology, we still miss the bus on making big platforms or products that could have come out of India. And that has fueled a lot of discussion as well as interest in having Indian counterparts to the platform companies like the American ones, which right now are the dominant parties here. You said what it feels like is it feels like being stuck in a between a rock and a hard place, because by default, the platforms have now become the place where a lot of activism happens, where people reach out to each other in times of help, which we have seen because the second wave of the pandemic in India just ravaged through, and these platforms were the places where citizens were scrambling to get oxygen cylinders, medicines, etc., where family relationships happen. And through the pandemic, I think we've all recognized the importance of internet. India is also a country which shut down internet 129 times in 2020, and it's already shut down 21 times this year. So the platforms are important, the companies are important, whether it is the messaging social media giants, whether it is just the usual ones with social media offerings. They're all where a big part of the life happens. And then there is the government. And sometimes what happens, of course, is that a lot of free speech and expression or dissent is about government policies. And that time these platforms become very important in order to express, in order to organize, in order to also spread the information and messaging. But the platforms themselves are a black hole. We do not know what they actually do, what is the secret sauce of the algorithm. We do not know when something is taken down or when content is removed, when accounts are blocked. We don't get much information. Some of these platforms like Twitter obviously remove a lot of it. Then sometimes if there is a public spat, they will come out and say, oh, we were receiving a lot of government requests and law requires us for confidentiality. All we have done is given quantitative numbers to the Lumen database or something else based in the United States. Then there is also the fact that the government, although is correct on certain aspects, because as we all know, that the root of the problem of the technology package, which is sweeping the human race, consisting of smartphones, social media companies, which peddles a form of convenience that we are all buying into, the root of the problem is the business model of these convenience services. So because they sell people to advertisers, the value in digital advertising lies in collecting a lot of information. Rightly so, the governments are concerned, the government, and they would like to at least protect their citizens. The second aspect now we've all seen is how important even these apps and companies have become in issues of geopolitics. When there were skirmishes between India and China on the border, the Indian government reacted by banning starting from 59 apps, including TikTok, etc., to certain other apps, etc. also. But we also see that a government which is democratically elected, but is at least displaying certain signs where information control is really important and curbing of dissent is really important, has also understood that they can pretend to talk about democratic values on the world stage or in public, but they can also use the companies themselves in order to collect data, in order to spy and surveil their own citizens, and also create just the expression of dissent very difficult. And that is what we have now found that is happening in India. There is a public theater which is being played out, which has singled out Twitter against the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Both of the entities talking about either user rights or citizens' rights, whether it is right to privacy or free speech and expression, while users are forced to watch from the sidelines as they talk out and create more and more public theater. So my view generally has been that there is a lot of political parties fueled online harassment against anybody who's trying to talk about rights these days, whether it is freedom of press or it is free speech and expression, or just calling out the policies of the government. The companies understand that markets like ours are so big and so attractive that it would be a shame to be deprived of that market like they're deprived of China. So they continue to say, oh, we are only required by law to be complicit in certain things. And they still continue to play the Lex Loci server game, where sometimes they would say, oh, we're only a sales office in India. The rest of our legal stuff or any responsibility, and the orders are coming from our masters in Menlo Park or wherever on the West Coast anybody is. So that's why the citizens do realize that democratic self-government depends on thoughtfulness. And as voters and citizens, we want to govern through our ability to understand one another and seek common good. But none of these parties are right now working for citizens. Ostensibly, governments are trying to address the importance of the problem of misinformation and disinformation. They also obviously always will throw in that they're trying to protect women and children, but that protection, that security seems much more like a fig leaf than what is actually going on behind these various policies and legislations we are watching.
Mishi, thank you so much. I'm going to follow up on some of those points in a minute, but before I do that, Shwe, could I turn to you? You have been a digital rights activist in Myanmar for a very long time. You have seen Myanmar convert from an environment, or as companies might think of it, a market that no one was paying attention to and that no one really cared about, to an environment that has become one of the most high priority political environments for many of the American companies due to the genocide several years ago, and you've seen sort of Myanmar transition then to being what some people have described as the poster child for local engagement between companies and civil society. And then through that into, unfortunately, a coup in February, where we have seen many of these companies be blocked. And we've also seen these companies being used to foment bad information and violence. For example, the military using TikTok to push out information. Can you walk us through what the experience has been of moving from being in an environment that no one was paying attention to being in an environment that everyone was paying attention to? How was that engagement felt? How has it shifted over the years? And now that we are in an environment where speech is being restricted so intensely on the ground, what role do you see for the platforms in this moment in terms of protecting speech locally? So if we can start with just the transition that you've seen.
Thanks, Kat. So in terms of the transition, before we go into that, I just want to say that it's not all companies. The first thing that I want to highlight is that it's not all companies who are trying to engage with us or like build a relationship. So in the beginning, what we are seeing is, as you mentioned, before the connectivity revolution or the market, we didn't get a lot of like people's attention. The same for the companies, even if it's social media companies to the ISPs. So the thing is, we for Myanmar, who we just had like dictatorship, and then we were going through the transition and transitional democracy at that time. There were already a lot of injustice that we've experienced, that we've had to gone through before any of the social media platforms. So when it started happening, of course, it was a lot. It was weaponized by the military, and of course, as Facebook will say in their language, bad actors use Facebook and other social media platforms to weaponize and to spread their propagandas. And we've seen events that had unfolded in the offline spaces as well because of the consequences on online. And those are the kind of issues that we're trying to raise with Facebook and other platforms a lot at the time, but it was mainly focusing on one particular content rather than looking at the big picture and looking at the bad actors behind that, and looking at the behavior that they will do now. So it was more like, in the beginning they were like, oh, maybe because people don't really understand the community centers, which was only in English at the time. So they were focusing more on localizing the community standards, as well as, of course, training people how to report. But even then, the reporting flow wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect in a sense that we cannot report things if it is not, graphically violent. It might be like call to violence, but of course, even for that, the content moderator will need to understand the context and also what is exactly being said in that article. And at that time, of course, Facebook didn't have Myanmar speaking content moderators at the time. So it was like, from their way of thinking is more of trying to patch things up by localizing, as well as like training people how to report, but rather than, looking at the big picture. But then because of the genocide, it moved, because, there were a lot of pressure, especially on Facebook, because of the UN fact-finding mission that Facebook played, Facebook was basically weaponized by the military in terms of their propaganda and the genocide, and what had happened in Rakhine regarding the genocide. So they started to give a lot of attention to us, but it took a lot of effort by the civil society organizations, engagement, tireless engagement with these companies, trying to talk to them on the issue that was not their priorities and making them become their priorities. So it was a lot of tireless effort by a collective of civil society organizations on these issues, and really pushing Facebook to look into the priorities. So and this is just only on Facebook, but if we look at platforms like Google, Twitter, and later of course TikTok, still we're trying to engage with them a lot. And of course, we will see people from these companies at conferences like, RISECon, Internet Freedom Festival. That's when we trying to grab them and, just trying to talk to them like, hey, this is what is happening in my country. These are the issues that's really important. And then what they will do is they will just like, hand over their business card, and then they will be like, oh, we will be happy to talk to you. Just email us, and then they disappear. That has been the experience over the over the years. Before 2000, I will say before 2018, that has been the experience with a lot of companies, and they would just disappear. And for people like me and the people in Myanmar and in other countries to go to the conferences like that, it is also another question of like getting the funding from the donors, sending us to there, and then donors often question those kind of support. So it is, it's not really easy for us to be present at these conferences and trying to build these relationships with the tech companies. It's also another, challenges that we will always have. But I just wanted to point out here that with Facebook, we had somewhat built relationship and been able to push for some of the stuff that we really need them to address. For example, the staffing, they started hiring from content moderator to having policy people focusing on Myanmar. It has been a huge, I will say that it has had a lot of, impact on the thing that we would like to push for, and the impact that we are seeing regarding Facebook. But in terms of Google, Twitter, and other companies, before the coup, we had genocide. They didn't really try to engage with us anything, or even let's say with Google, of course, it is a different profile compared to Facebook. But we had a lot of civil society organizations, human rights defenders who needed security support, for example, with like Google or like Twitter, for example, but they never really trying to engage with us, even though we've tried a lot of times, a lot of numbers to have to build relationship with them. And now we are in a coup where we need because in Myanmar, a lot of people use Gmail, where Facebook is the internet and Gmail is basically the email system in Myanmar. And a lot of people use Gmail, and for example, right now, most of the people are in hiding. A lot of people are relocating, and we really need some of the people's accounts to, for example, to reset because they are not using their SIM cards anymore, or because like they cannot log in because of the two-factor authentication system is really messed up. We try to reach out to them and they never reply. And I cannot help but think like, what more do they need from us other than, like more than the coup? What more do they need from us to build a relationship and to really address these issues?
Mm-hmm. And so I think, Shwe, one of the things I'm hearing from you is really that it was a trajectory of not really having any relationships to building some personal relationships at great expense to the effort and the time of civil society locally. And having built those personal relationships, you've been able to shift some corporate approaches basically within Facebook, but have yet to see significant other shifts in approach. Is that an accurate summation, do you feel?
Yes. Thank you for summarizing that.
Well, so I wanted to then actually turn this question to both of you, because I can certainly say from my position at Internews, I see a great number of invitations for consultations on different policies, right? And on different standards. So, as we saw, Twitter, for example, just did a large multilingual survey on how they should approach world leaders on their platform. We'll have consultations on how they should think about violence against women, consultations on, just various policies, right? But Shwe, what you are pointing out is that there are so many elements of the actual products and how the product operates locally in terms of getting access to the product, being able to use it, being able to understand how to report, things being available in local language, content moderation being able to be done in a local language, that don't really have anything to do with policies, but instead have to do with how a policy would then be built in or implemented into the way that the actual product is experienced on the ground, and how civil society can work with it to create a safer and better environment. Can I ask both of you, I know that both of you have had some engagement with policy teams at different companies and some engagement with product teams, with engineers, with researchers. That type of engagement is, I think, more rare, but very interesting. Could I ask both of you, and whoever would like to jump in first, please do so, to talk a little bit about your different experiences in engaging with policy teams at companies versus product teams, and where you see pros and cons in those different approaches. Either of you jump in.
Mishi, please go ahead.
All right. So first thing I want to say is that geography really matters. If you are in one of the majority world countries, our developing countries, one doesn't get the same kind of either the engagement or I would say the respect until there are major issues happening in public from any of these companies. I work also in the United States, and I see that contrast play out all the time. That even in a very large market like India, I have mostly seen the engagements would be from some of these companies, at least until about 2019, were always about feel-good stories, how they're doing well for the poor people who never had anything else. And it has that tinge of, we are doing so well for your country, what is there to engage with you? And you perhaps maybe not smart enough as our American counterparts are. And so all the invitations you're talking about and the consultations, etc., that don't happen in our countries. And I think Shwe can talk about it more, but at least it doesn't happen at the same scale at all. Mostly their engagement is, we are going to go and talk to a lot of politicians. We are going to talk to a lot of these celebrities and show how they use the platform to reach various people. So it's the feel-good stories which are promoted by the companies. I think it has increased a little bit better. It is doing much better, and I'm not going to name the companies, but they are definitely making an effort post 2019. Also because they're also watching that there is a lot which is going to happen from various governments, and we are natural allies in certain places and other places. If you're going to talk about right to privacy and surveillance capitalism is the only way they make their money, obviously we are not going to be allies. But when it comes to content moderation, it comes to traceability or encryption, etc., we become natural allies. So I think when it works for them, then they obviously do rely. That's the first thing I want to say is that. So I would really appreciate, and again, the caveat here is some of them are definitely making an attempt, but I think others need to do better. I think that if they are going to be in these markets, the markets people, the people who are there deserve the same respect. And they can't say that the 350 million, which is the entire population of the United States, because our genesis is from there, they deserve to be heard more and decide the policies for everyone else. I think this is also the kind of posture when they take with the governments, then the governments tend to talk about digital sovereignty far more than there is any merit in that argument. This posturing, and if I, and I'm sure some people have followed this entire thing, the brouhaha in India, which is happening for the past 2-3 weeks between the government of India as well as these companies. And a lot of this is government saying, rightly so, that you don't take us seriously or engage with us or don't respect us, because there is an element of that. And then it becomes very difficult to even talk about the user rights. And that's why I said that users are forced to watch from the sidelines as the powerful and the almighty financially try to talk about these matters. The second thing I think which Shwe was referring to, somehow there is Google magic dust on everything. YouTube doesn't get talked about. They're all always silently, covertly just saying, yes, yes, we are doing everything. There is not much which is known, how that is done, what is being handled, where are the issues. And it's not, the engagement from them is not as much as the other platforms are doing. And I'm curious to know what is there. The question you asked was our engagement with policy teams and product teams. Now, I'm a lawyer who works for technology companies, a lot of free and open source software projects, and I deal with engineers and people who actually are building the product all day long. And I understand how important it is for them to be having that information, or at least that kind of an interaction. I don't think that the policy teams or the legal teams allow those engineers to talk to either civil society or anyone else. I don't think that, I think it's always through these loops, these hoops one has to jump through to get to anywhere close to that. In 2018, in India, a lot of civil society organizations led by Software Freedom Law Center wrote to several of these companies, which was WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and various other companies also, to say that a feature of WhatsApp was the ability of any user with administrator or rights to add any other user to a group without the latter's express permission. So which meant that in the absence of a mechanism to prevent myself from being added to a group, which I don't want to participate in, user had no option to but continuously manually exit from the group. And it was troubling because a lot of journalists, a lot of activists, they were being added to these groups in which, of course, then their information, which is about a phone number or who they are, etc., became easy for circulation amongst a large number of members who were part of those groups. And a very prominent journalist called me up to ask, can you help me with this? Because I'm constantly being added to groups where my wife and my 12-year-old daughter's pictures are being shared in forms which not only scares me, but also disgusts me. But as many times I exit groups, I'm continuously being added to a bunch of them. We didn't have any engagement after that letter. We spoke to some policy folks, but what happens thereafter, we do not know. There's been a lot of discussion about the number of messages, the number of people you can forward the messages to. This was a major issue in Latin America. This was an issue which was raised in Southeast Asia. And the companies then would watch and then perhaps will make a decision to change it or not change it based on their business model. So I would say that there is definitely an improvement in engagement for sure, and they are trying to make an effort. But we would be fooling ourselves to say that it's at any level the way they engage with with our European or American counterparts, or ever the product team is exposed to us.
Thanks so much, Mishi. And Shwe, over to you. What have you felt is the difference between engaging with a policy team at a company versus a product team? And if I could add on to what Mishi just mentioned as well, as someone who is an activist not only in Myanmar, but in many circles in Southeast Asia, what is the difference as well when you try to engage on issues involving Myanmar versus involving other countries in the region?
Thanks. So I just wanted to echo on what Mishi said, like hoops you have to jump through to get to the product people. I cannot agree more. Because that has been the same experience that, you know, not only Myanmar, but a lot of the colleagues in different countries have also experienced as well. And I mean, policy is of course, you know, important. It is a first step, but what we also really need is the enforcement of that policy. And you know, the kind of the policy that we've engaged most of the time in the past, you know, for so many years was mostly like 45 minutes or like an hour type of engagement, and kind of make you feel special to talk to them for an hour and talk about these issues. But we were never really able to get into the product issues and also like ask them to fix it. But when we got to engage with the product people, what we really understand is, you know, from my personal experience, is that some of the engineers also know you know, where they need to be fixed. And it is basically the same issue that we've also been pointing out and asking to be fixed. But what is been happening is, of course, you know, the engagement with the policy, and policy just cycling back to the policy question, but rather than the product changes. So policy is important, but in terms of, you know, looking at the enforcement and etc., the fact that we were able to engage with the product people had a lot of impact on us. So we can just, you know, like talk to them, and I feel they don't really take things personally and don't feel that we are, you know, giving them problems to solve, but rather that is also something that they know, because that's basically they spend most of the time on the product's structure as well. But in terms of the regional, is that when we started talking to a lot of different organizations in the region, starting from 2018, is that, you know, they will say one thing to us, and then they will say another thing to other colleagues in different parts of the world. But, you know, eventually it's not just like one particular content. Again, it is very contextualized, but also there are a lot of similar issues that we are seeing in a lot of different countries. So yeah, you know, policy is important, but in terms of like enforcement, really having to engage with the product people and really you know, deep diving into the issues to have product changes can also have a lot of impact as well in the long term.
And Shwe, can you give us an example of where you've seen a product changed through engagement, where you feel like the change was really helpful or useful?
For example, the reporting flow, for sure. If we look at in, for example, 2015, the reporting flow doesn't even have. I mean, I cannot really recall at the moment now, but even for like, let's say someone is trying to be me, but, you know, in terms of like reporting that account, or when it comes to like harassment, or when it comes to, you know, graphic violence or like graphic harassment, all that stuff. Before that, it was really vague, and it was probably like 5 main issues. That doesn't necessarily mean any particular content that we want to report as well. So in terms of the reporting flow, you know, I will say that's like one of the example. And another part is, of course, the security features, especially you know, when it comes to two-factor authentication, etc. So those are the 2 visible things that we can see.
Got it. And so when you were talking about a reporting tool, you were referring to Facebook, is that correct?
Yes, not Google, not Google.
But so that's, I think, a great example of where there can be a policy that exists around, we don't want to allow harassment on the platform, for example. We don't want to allow impersonation on the platform. But if the reporting tool is not designed in such a way that locally you can truly understand how to report harassment, right? Or how to flag that impersonation is occurring, what is that policy is essentially a feckless policy, because there's no one at the local level who can actually seek its enforcement or help the company understand when it's being violated, assuming the company does really want to be enforcing those policies. And so I think that that's a really helpful example. Thank you. I wanted to move next to a question that I think sometimes in, as you know, I live in Tunisia, and I think sometimes in America and in Europe to some degree, there is a certain privilege that comes with things like hashtag delete Facebook, right? Or I've gotten rid of Twitter. Like there's a certain privilege that comes with being able to have a strong enough information infrastructure in your country that you can selectively remove yourself from different private sector platforms because that aligns with your own personal morals or decisions. But can you walk us through the feasibility of actually doing that in a country like India or in a country like Myanmar? How realistic is it for people to leave WhatsApp or leave Facebook or leave Google or leave Twitter or TikTok at this moment? Mishi, can I start with you?
Okay. I mean, I don't use Facebook, so, but I think that you're right about the fact that in certain parts of the world, it's more privileged. But I will say that at least in India, what we are watching in the past 2 years, there are a lot of alternatives which are emerging. They're mostly copycats. They're like a Twitter equivalent, which has now emerged, Coup. Whenever government of India and Twitter are going against each other, the VCs pump in a ton of money in Coup. We've watched an alternative which has come to TikTok, because once the government of India decided that it's not going to be allowing for TikTok, then an Indian alternative emerged. Now, for users, it's a good thing, because to your question, that if there are multiple alternatives in the market, then they have a lot to choose from. The problem is twofold. All of these platforms work on network effects. If I have built a certain kind of a following on one of these platforms, then I'm not going to be able to just replicate it on another platform. And data interoperability is not something which any of the companies are willing to consider, because data is the most important thing here. So it's not like my phone number or anything that I can go from one telecom service provider or the other. And that's why it's really hard if people have put in a number of years building a certain following. This is something which just happened to me also, but if they have built some numbers of followers on a particular platform, just to say I'm going to go away from this one, is not going to be so simple. And a lot of times the new alternatives are not as popular as the current platforms are, and that means that you want to have a reach as far as it can be possible. I will say that I went through a personal loss, but also what my country of birth has been going through in the past 10 weeks in terms of the pandemic. And everybody was using whatever platforms they had in order to amplify messages. I was struggling to get back my Twitter account, which didn't have a very large following, but had around 17,000, 18,000 followers. And I really wanted to use it to help out others, but I just didn't have the control of my account. And that's the first time when I felt that would have been very useful because then the message could have been amplified in a certain way. So I will say that the alternatives are emerging, but they're not as many or as popular. The network effects seriously plays a major role even now. And I'll also say that a lot of people are now at least beginning to think about what these platforms mean for them in terms of privacy and various other conveniences they offer. And I think that's why what Shwe's point earlier was also that Google's products don't get discussed enough, but there is a lot of reliance on those products also. And it's not just about social media and what it means for the ecosystem. So increasingly, we are seeing that local alternatives emerge, but it's not that they also give us as much confidence as users, because they could be more pliant to government requests. We might not even see that kind of transparency at all, because they're very enthusiastic about always agreeing with whatever the government is asking for them. Like even in the current IT rules, when we are watching, the Indian alternatives have said, oh, we are totally fine. It's the Americans who have the problem. Now the user is wondering, how is it that you have no problems and they have the problem? So am I supposed to be relying on an American company to protect my rights against the government? And then of course, everybody jumps on the bandwagon of, oh, you're an anti-national because you're not promoting an indigenous product. You're more interested in the American product. So it just, the circle is complete about being stuck in between a rock and a hard place.
Thanks so much, Mishi. And Shwe, we're coming close to our sort of 2-minute time, but can you, in a minute or so, yes, help us understand for Myanmar?
Yeah, so deleting Facebook or going, disconnecting, data detoxing is also a bit of a privileged thing for you to be able to do so, because in Myanmar, with the internet shutdown or even without it, we have a lot of groups who are already, disconnected. So in terms of, using encrypted services like, Signal and other alternatives, people, right now what's happening is that the internet connection is really, really slow. And in terms of VPN, not all VPNs are not working. It is not like we are trying our best to support a lot of human rights defenders with these VPNs, but some VPNs works on Wi-Fi, some VPNs doesn't work on mobile data, for example. And there are a lot of people using VPN that, for example, digital security cannot confidently, say or recommend to use those VPNs. So it is really stopping people from going to these, encrypted services. So, at the expense of their safety, so that they can better protect themselves. But in terms of the tech companies like like Facebook, when it comes to WhatsApp and etc., of course they can expand the bandwidth, which is good. I'm not saying it is bad, but because of the situation in Myanmar, deleting Facebook or going offline is not entirely an option for us.
Thank you so much, Shwe. And with that, my dear friends, we are at time. And so I want to thank you both so much for your contributions. I think my takeaway from this session is certainly that we have a lot to do in the world in terms of protecting free speech, in terms of protecting civil rights and online liberties. And that for the moment, at least, as Mishi said, we are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And we are going to need to find functional ways for civil society to truly work, not only with the private sector, but also to push on their governments to keep respecting these rights. Thank you both very much for your time. And thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us today. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you so much for that excellent discussion. And thank you in particular to our panelists who took real personal risk to join us today.